Tyberos, called the Red Wake, is the chapter master of the Carcharodons Astra, the Space Marine chapter known throughout the sparse records that mention them as the Space Sharks. He holds the chapter's own title for its supreme commander, Shadelord, and carries a second honorific, Reaper Lord of the Void, that marks his standing among the chapter's officer caste. He commands the Carcharodons battle barge Nicor and simultaneously serves as company master of the chapter's first company, an elite Terminator armored formation known as the Red Brethren. Almost everything specific to Tyberos himself comes from two sources separated by nearly a decade: his appearance as a battlefield commander in Forge World's account of the Badab War, and his later role as the Carcharodons' reigning chapter master in Robbie McNiven's core trilogy of Black Library novels. Between those two appearances, the character was expanded rather than rewritten, and the war record from Badab remains the foundation for everything the novels later confirmed. He's one of the few named Carcharodons ever given sustained page time, in a chapter whose entire ethos is built around leaving as little trace as possible. Names and titles. The name Tyberos is generally read as deriving from Tiburon, the Spanish word for shark, fitting a chapter whose own name works the same way: Carcharodons. Astra is the High Gothic form the chapter itself uses, while Space Sharks is how that name renders in Low Gothic. No published source explains the epithet Red Wake directly, though it fits a warrior consistently described as leaving nothing behind him in combat but a trail of mangled corpses, and whose sheer size makes him stand out even among his fellow Astartes. Within the chapter, he is also styled Shadelord, the Carcharodons' own term for their chapter master, and Reaper Lord of the Void, a second honorific whose precise origin is equally undocumented, though its shared root echoes the standard Carcharodons' captaincy rank of Reaper Prime, the officer responsible for conducting a company's recruitment tithes. Tyberos did not appear under this name in his first published appearance. Games Workshop's Imperial Armor Volume 10, published in 2010, records the Carcharodons' commander at Badab as the baleful first Captain Tiburon. By the time the character resurfaced in Black Library fiction later that decade, he had been folded fully into the role of chapter master and renamed Tyberos, and it is this later form of the name and title that has stood as the character's settled identity ever since. The discrepancy is minor and never addressed directly in the fiction itself, but it marks Tyberos as a character built up gradually across two different eras of Warhammer 40,000 publishing, instead of introduced whole. Appearance. Tyberos is described as a giant even by the standards of the Adeptus Astartes, dwarfing his fellow Carcharodons in both height and mass, and by most accounts he ranks among the largest firstborn Space Marines on record. He's almost never seen outside his suit of Terminator armor, described in the novels as tactical dreadnought plate heavily modified to accommodate his size. His helm is boar-snouted, its lenses as black and depthless as his own eyes, and a single yellowed skull hangs from a chain at his waist, an old trophy whose origin is never explained. On the rare occasions his face has been described, witnesses recall a corpse-white countenance with patches of bone visible through thinned, bloodless flesh, and eyes that are entirely black, without visible sclera or iris. This is consistent with the dentical affliction that marks older members of the Carcharodons generally, a degenerative condition tied to the chapter's gene seed that roughens the skin with shark-like dermal denticles as a Void Brother ages. Tyberos rarely speaks above a whisper, and those who have heard him in council describe the effect as more unsettling than any shout, a soft voice that nonetheless carries the certainty of a death sentence. Hunger and Slake. Tyberos fights with a pair of matched gauntlet weapons named Hunger and Slake, relic wargear of a pattern unrecognized by the adepts of Mars. Each combines the barbed power blades of a lightning claw with an inner row of grinding, tooth-like adamantium points drawn from chainfist technology, so that a strike from either weapon both cuts and chews through what it hits. Neither weapon was built for the Carcharodons. Both originally belonged to the Ashen Claws, a chapter of uncertain standing that operates as a renegade Black Shield force out along the Ghoul Stars, trading intermittently with the Carcharodons for technology and recruits despite, or perhaps because of, its own murky relationship with the wider Imperium. Chapter whispers trace the weapons back further still. to the Raven Guard's 18th chapter, a Terran expeditionary fleet said to have been exiled to the Ghoul Stars by Primarch Corax after he took command of the 19th Legion. That formation never returned to the fold, and across the centuries it decayed into the Ashen Claws as they exist today. According to chapter tradition, Tyberos claimed Hunger and Slake after being provoked into single combat with the Ashen Claws' own chapter master, Nehat Nev, during one of these barter exchanges, and won. The Ashen Claws never accepted the result as legitimate. To them, the gauntlets remain stolen relics of their own chapter, and the grievance has never fully healed, resurfacing whenever the two fleets are forced back into contact. The Chapter of the Void. The Carcharodons Astra are unusual even by the standards of a galaxy full of unusual space marine chapters, and Tyberos' authority makes little sense without some grounding in the chapter's own strangeness. Their founding is unrecorded. Imperial scholars have proposed dates as early as the second founding and as late as the poorly documented 23rd founding, and chapter tradition itself claims 10,000 years of service to the Emperor without settling the question. One Deathwatch-era sourcebook complicates the picture further still, naming the Carcharodons a 23rd founding successor of the little-known Eagle Warriors, rather than of the Raven Guard, a claim that sits at odds with almost everything else written about the chapter. The Carcharodons maintain no homeworld, a status formalized in ancient documents called the Edicts of Exile, that bind them to ceaseless patrol of the galaxy's outer dark rather than garrison duty within Imperial space. They travel as a single nomad predation fleet, replenishing their ranks and their labor force through periodic raids on Imperial worlds called Red Tithes, in which conquered populations are harvested wholesale, the majority bound for service as serfs and slaves aboard the fleet, and a smaller number channeled into brutal gladiatorial trials. Those who survive are broken down further through hypnotic indoctrination before being judged fit for the gene seed implantation process. The chapter's origins are an active dispute within its own fiction, not just a gap in outside knowledge. Carcharodons display pale, near-white skin and fully black eyes, traits associated both with Corvus Corax's homeworld of Lycaeus and with Conrad Kurz's Nostromo, meaning the same physical evidence has been read as pointing to Raven Guard descent and to Night Lord's descent, depending on which detail a given source emphasizes. Imperial armor describes the chapter's gene seed as unusually stable rather than mutated, which complicates any simple explanation for features that in other chapters would be written off as genetic drift. The novels add a further data point without settling the matter. In Outer Dark, the Carcharodons are said to supply the Raven Guard-descended Ashen Claws with stores of pure Raven Guard gene seed, tacitly treating their own stock as a legitimate source of that legion's bloodline. Separately, Deathwatch apothecaries who have had the rare chance to examine gene seed recovered from slain Carcharodons report genetic markers specific to the Raven Guard, adding further weight to that side of the argument even as other sources keep the question open. The chapter's own titles supply a further thread. Shadelord, the rank Tyberos holds, is recorded as having been used by only one other officer, the Raven Guard's Arcus Fowl, commander of a Terran fleet element exiled from the Legion around the time Corvus Corax assumed its command, and the chief librarian's title of Pale Nomad traces to the Raven Guard's own 11th chapter, similarly separated from the Legion during the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy. Games Workshop and Black Library have never resolved the question outright, and the ambiguity appears deliberate, preserved across every published account of the chapter to date. Age brings its own toll. Denticle growths, small tooth-like protrusions in the skin, spread across a Carcharodon's body the longer he serves, most visible on veterans such as the chapter's chief librarian. A separate and more dangerous condition known as the blindness can seize a Void Brother in the heat of combat, stripping away all discipline and occasionally turning a warrior against his own battle brothers before it passes. Carcharodons who succumb to repeated episodes of the blindness, or who fail the chapter in some serious way, may be cast out entirely as void exiles, stripped of standing within the fleet they once served. First Captain Tiburon and the Badab War. The Carcharodons' first confirmed appearance in Imperial history came during the Badab War, a rebellion. Chapter Master Luft Huron of the Astral Claws had led against the Imperium since 901 M41, drawing several other chapters into his succession as the fighting escalated over the following years. the Carcharodons made their own unannounced arrival in the Maelstrom Zone in 910M41, joining a conflict that had already been raging for the better part of a decade, their strike cruiser fire-blackened from long service and identifying itself through Imperial authorization protocols so old that few present had ever seen their like. The chapter announced itself using the High Gothic form of its name, Carcharodons Astra, and formally requested permission to join the Loyalist war effort, claiming to be answering a summons that had originated from Terra itself. It fell to Tyberos, presumed by the other Loyalist commanders to be the Carcharodons' ranking officer present and recorded in the campaign's own records as their force commander, to negotiate the chapter's admission into the campaign. He presented the conflict's ranking inquisitor, Legate Jarndyce Frayne, with notices patent affirming the chapter's ancient rights and titles, and submitted personally to psychic probing and gene sampling so that Frayne could vouch for the chapter's loyalty. Lord High Commander Karab Kuln of the Red Scorpions, serving as Magister Militum over the assembled Loyalist forces, accepted the Carcharodons into his line of battle on Frayne's word, though he remained openly wary of a chapter that had ignored the Codex Astartes for its entire recorded existence. Throughout these dealings, Tyberos was the sole Carcharodon who spoke directly with the other Loyalist commanders, and always in the same soft, carrying whisper that would later define every account of him. The Endymion Cluster and the fall of Badab Primaris. Rather than committing the Carcharodons directly to the fighting around Badab Primaris, Cullen dispatched them to the Endymion Cluster, territory administered by the Mantis Warriors, one of the secessionist chapters. Tyberos led his Terminators of the Red Brethren through campaign after campaign there, including the Siege of Endymion Prime fought alongside the Fire Angels chapter, systematically destroying every world in the cluster known to have sheltered or supplied the Mantis Warriors. The devastation was thorough enough to strip the Mantis Warriors of any meaningful capacity to continue fighting, and the Carcharodons used the opportunity to replenish their own losses and material from what they took, a practical benefit that did not go unnoticed by the other chapters present. When the war's final phase converged on Badab Primaris itself, Cullen assigned the Carcharodons a role suited to their methods, rather than to conventional siege doctrine. While the Exorcists and Sons of Medusa fought to break the Starfort Sentinel Sigma and silence the orbital defense network known as the Ring of Steel, and the Star Phantom spearheaded the ground assault on the Palace of Thorns, Luft Huron's own seat of power, the Carcharodons were tasked with the planet's primary infrastructure instead. They responded by sabotaging the reactor cores beneath Badab Primaris' principal hive cities, a brutally efficient solution that broke the planet's capacity to resist without requiring the protracted grinding assault the other Loyalist forces were locked into elsewhere. With Badab Primaris broken, the war's formal reckoning took another year to complete. In 913 M41, the Mantis Warriors and the other surviving secessionist chapters were put on trial before a consistorial court of their peers, and the Mantis Warriors lost their ancestral claim to the Endymion Cluster outright. Its worlds and holdings passed to the Firehawks chapter in perpetuity. The Carcharodons received no territory of their own in the settlement, only the Firehawks' tacit agreement to let them harvest new aspirants from the cluster's population, a right they exercised without delay. The imprisoned remnant of the Mantis Warriors could only watch as their own world's young men were culled and set against one another in gladiatorial trials, the survivors taken to become Carcharodon Space Marines in their turn. With that final harvest complete, the Carcharodon fleet withdrew as abruptly as it had arrived, vanishing back into the dark above the galactic plane before any formal accounting of its own conduct could be demanded. Shade Lord of the Nomad Predation Fleet. As Chapter Master, Tyberos holds a dual command that mirrors the Carcharodons' broader organizational habits. He leads the chapter as a whole from the Nicor, an ancient and heavily modified Charybdis-class Grand Cruiser dating to the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, armored and shielded well beyond a standard battle barge and carrying a long-range macro-cannon broadside alongside torpedo tubes capable of launching boarding torpedoes. In place of the Thunderhawk hangars found on most chapter vessels, the Nicor mounts an array of Archaeotech mass teleporters reputedly capable of moving whole battle companies at once. Tyberos simultaneously serves as company master of the first company, the Red Brethren, whose ranks are drawn from the chapter's most seasoned Terminator-qualified veterans. Rather than keeping this elite formation concentrated as a single strategic reserve, Tyberos disperses its warriors among the chapter's other companies as they range across the void, a practice that serves two purposes at once. Individually, a Red Brethren veteran attached to a company acts as a devastating force multiplier in any engagement he joins. Collectively, the same veterans function as Tyberos' eyes and enforcers throughout the fleet, ensuring that every company continues to operate within the bounds the Shade Lord sets, however far from the Nicor a given battle group might be operating. Those who have served under him describe a commander whose stillness is as unnerving as his violence. He is remembered as an immovable, near-silent presence whose judgments, once delivered, are never revisited, and whose rare intervention on a battlefield is treated by his own Void brothers as a privilege to witness rather than simply an order being carried out. This account is echoed across every source that describes him in action, from the Badab campaign records to his later appearances in the Black Library novels, and it is one of the few consistent threads running through a character built up from fragmentary, sometimes contradictory sources. Tyberos in Black Library fiction. Robbie McNiven's Carcharodons novels, published through Black Library, gave the chapter its first sustained fictional treatment, and with it the first extended look at Tyberos beyond his brief Badab War appearance. The first novel, Red Tithe, published in 2016 and 2017, follows newly promoted company master Baal Shar as he conducts a red tithe on the prison world of Zartak, contested by a Night Lord's raiding force with its own interest in the planet's population. Tyberos does not appear directly on the page in Red Tithe. He's discussed and anticipated by other characters as the chapter's fearsome, largely unseen ruler, and readers of the novel came away from it hoping a future installment would finally put him at the center of the action. That installment arrived with Outer Dark in 2018, and it is where Tyberos finally appears directly on the page for the first time in the series. Rather than opening on its main crisis, the novel first revisits the chapter's uneasy relationship with the Ashen Claws. Sent to a Targatus Prime to treat with Nehat Nev for fresh recruits and fleet support, Baal Shar, now serving as Reaper Prime, finds the Ashen Claws chapter master, unwilling to help unless Hunger and Slake are returned. When Shar refuses, Nev forces him into a gladiatorial duel against a captured World Eater, which Shar survives. Reporting back, Shar kneels before the Red Wake's own throne, flanked by Red Brethren and watched over by the chapter's chief librarian, Te Kahurangi, known as the Pale Nomad, and his Lexicanium apprentice, Kauri. And it is here that the novel's real crisis takes shape. A Genestealer infestation known as the Cult of the Star Saints has spread through every level of society on the Imperial Shrine world of Piety 5. Its Patriarch's psychic call strong enough to draw an approaching Tyrannid hive fleet down toward the planet. With his chapter facing near annihilation, Tyberos calls once more on the old strained pact with the Ashen Claws, and this time they answer it. On Piety 5, Shar's Terminators and an ancient Contemptor pattern dreadnought provoke the cult into a full uprising, deliberately let themselves be driven into a last stand inside the planet's cathedral, and use the resulting bloodbath to draw the Genestealer Patriarch into the open, where a Carcharodons librarian cut it down. Ashen Claws reinforcements broke what remained of the cult soon after, and with the Patriarch's psychic beacon silenced, the Tyrannid fleet lost its heading and turned away. In a separate shipboard engagement, Tyberos is described killing 3 Tyrannid warriors in seconds before climbing into their own boarding pod and killing everything inside it, moving with a speed witnesses find almost impossible to track. The peace with the Ashen Claws did not hold. The promised return of Hunger and Slake fell through, and Tyberos and Nehat Nev parted on bitter terms once again. Across these novels, McNiven grounds the Carcharodons culture in imagery and naming conventions drawn from Maori and wider Polynesian tradition, a deliberate departure from the more classically Western coding, common to chapters such as the Ultramarines or Black Templars. Names such as Te Kahurangi and Nikora, ornamentation carved from coral, and tattooing practices tied to status within the chapter all appear throughout the series, giving the Carcharodons a distinct cultural register even as their gene seed origins remain officially unresolved. A further novel, Silent Hunters, followed in 2021, written by Eduardo Albert rather than McNiven. It centers on Chaplain Tangata Manu, revealed as the estranged brother of Chief Librarian Te Kahurangi as he pursues a relic stolen by the Drukhari into the webway city of Kamarok. a relic said to have once been entrusted to the chapter by a figure remembered only as the Forgotten One. Tyberos does not feature prominently in the novel, which proved the most divisive entry in the series among readers, with a substantial share of reviewers criticizing its departure from the tone and detail established in the earlier books. The chapter's fiction also includes several shorter works, among them David Annandale's early story, The Judges in Their Hunger, and McNiven's own, The Reaping Time and Death Warrant, none of which feature Tyberos directly. The next McNiven novel, Void Exile, published in 2025, returns to Baelshar and the Third Company as they are drawn out of the chapter's usual isolation to defend the Forge world of Diamantis alongside Adeptus Mechanicus allies, against a chaos-corrupted space hulk commanded by the Datanost Voldir, a disciple of the chaos demigod Vashtor the Archiphane. The novel finds Shar's own standing transformed. No longer Reaper Prime, he leads a band of the chapter's own Void Exiles from within the besieged hulk itself, giving the title a double meaning that ties directly back to the fate awaiting any Carcharodon who fails or succumbs to the blindness. The novel also folds newly arrived Primaris Marines into the chapter's ranks for the first time on the page, setting Firstborn tradition against Primaris doctrine alongside the friction with the Mechanicus allies. It centers on the chapter's wider culture rather than following Tyberos directly, continuing the series' pattern of using the whole chapter, not its chapter master alone, to carry most of the narrative weight. The Modern Era. Following the opening of the Great Rift and the beginning of the Era Indomitus, the Carcharodons were granted formal claim to Uthika, the former homeworld of the Mantis warriors, stripped from that chapter as part of its punishment after the Badab War, though there is little indication the fleet-based Carcharodons have made any meaningful use of a fixed world even after receiving it. Concrete information about the chapter's activities in this period remains scarce. The one confirmed account comes from White Dwarf issue 451, published in February 2020, which records a taciturn Space Sharks company master named Manfor, wielding a chainblade called Skinshrive and commanding the strike cruiser Matahe, fighting alongside the Indomitus Crusades fleet Secundus on two separate occasions before slipping back into the void each time, including a sudden strike that retook the Castellus Sanctic Citadel on Budor 5 from word-bearers in the midst of a demon-summoning ritual. Tyberos himself is not named as present in these engagements, but nothing in the available record indicates his death or replacement either, and the chapter's own habitual silence makes either possibility impossible to confirm from outside sources. The working assumption among those who track the Carcharodons is that Tyberos continues to lead the chapter's main body somewhere out along the galactic fringe, engaged in the same unrecorded, unglamorous war he has waged for millennia. A legend without a face. Tyberos occupies an unusual place in Warhammer 40,000's roster of named characters. He has never received an official Games Workshop plastic model, and the single Forge World resin miniature produced for him in 2011 has long since gone out of production, leaving him as one of the more prominent named Space Marines with no current official model to represent him on the tabletop. What has kept him a persistent presence in the setting instead is the consistency of his characterization across radically different eras of publishing, from a nameless and all but one detail commander in a 2010 campaign supplement, to the fully realized chapter master of a 3-novel series released across the following decade. Aside from the name change from Tiburon to Tyberos, each new appearance has built on what came before rather than rewriting it, an unusual outcome for a character assembled piecemeal across so many years, and it has left Tyberos standing as the clearest available face, whispering and nearly always sealed behind ancient Terminator plate, of a chapter that otherwise prefers to leave almost nothing behind it at all.